What if the answer to tired, aching legs wasn't in your muscles at all, but flowing silently through vessels you can't even see? There exists within each of us a network so vast, so intricate, that if you could lay it end to end, it would circle the earth more than twice. We speak of it rarely. We think of it even less. Yet with every heartbeat, this system carries life itself to the furthest corners of our being. Your blood vessels, these highways of existence, perform their work in absolute silence, asking nothing, offering everything. When you are young, they are elastic, responsive, almost playful in their ability to expand and contract with the body's needs. They open wide when muscles cry out for oxygen during a run. They narrow gently when you rest. This is the dance of healthy circulation, and for decades, you never notice it happening. But time, as it does with all biological systems, begins to write its story on these vessels. The changes start so subtly that they escape detection. Perhaps you notice your feet feel colder in the evening than they once did. Perhaps climbing stairs leaves your calves with a heavy, leaden sensation that wasn't there 5 years ago. These are not merely signs of aging muscles or weakening bones. These are whispers from your circulatory system, telling you that the blood is not reaching your legs with the same vigor, the same volume, the same nourishing rush it once did. After 70, this becomes less of a whisper and more of a persistent message that something fundamental has shifted in the architecture of flow. What happens inside these vessels is both mechanical and chemical, a convergence of forces that gradually restricts the passage of blood. The walls that were once smooth and flexible begin to accumulate deposits, begin to stiffen, begin to narrow the very channels through which life must pass. Think of a river that has silted up over centuries. The water still flows, yes, but not with the same force, not with the same reach to the banks and the roots that depend on it. Your leg muscles, your skin, your nerves, they all become like those roots, waiting for nourishment that arrives more slowly, in smaller amounts, with less of the vitality they require to function properly. This is not a sudden collapse, but a gradual dimming, and it affects quality of life in ways both obvious and hidden. The ability to walk without pain, to stand without heaviness, to feel warmth in your extremities, even on cool days. These ordinary experiences begin to feel like luxuries. What makes this particularly poignant is that many people accept these changes as inevitable, as the price of longevity, never realizing that the vessels themselves can be supported, can be restored to some measure of their former function. The question then becomes not whether circulation declines, for that is a documented certainty, but whether that decline can be slowed, softened, or even partially. Deep within the delicate lining of every blood vessel in your body, cells are producing a molecule so simple in structure, yet so profound in function that its discovery earned a Nobel Prize. This molecule is nitric oxide, composed of just one nitrogen atom bonded to one oxygen atom, and it serves as the master key to vascular relaxation. When these endothelial cells release nitric oxide into the smooth muscle surrounding your arteries, something remarkable occurs. The muscle fibers receive the signal and they soften. They release their grip. They allow the vessel to widen. This widening is not dramatic in appearance, but in terms of blood flow, even a small increase in diameter translates to a tremendous increase in volume. The mathematics of fluid dynamics tell us that doubling the width of a vessel can increase flow by 16 times. And while such doubling rarely occurs in living tissue, even modest improvements cascade into meaningful change. For decades, your body performed this molecular choreography without conscious effort. Nitric oxide was released in response to physical activity, to the shearing force of blood moving across vessel walls, to signals from the nervous system calling for more oxygen delivery. The vessels responded obediently, opening pathways for blood to surge into working muscles, into digestive organs after a meal, into the brain during moments of concentration. This was your circulation at its most responsive, most adaptive, most alive to the changing needs of each moment. But the production of nitric oxide is not a static capability that remains constant throughout life. The endothelial cells that manufacture this crucial molecule begin to lose their efficiency somewhere around the 5th or 6th decade. The reasons are multiple and interconnected. Oxidative stress accumulates, damaging the very enzymes responsible for creating nitric oxide. Inflammation becomes more chronic, interfering with the signaling pathways. The raw materials needed for synthesis become less available or less effectively utilized. What emerges from this convergence is a state of endothelial dysfunction, a phrase that sounds clinical but describes something quite personal: the gradual loss of your vessel's ability to respond to the body's requests for more blood. In the legs, this loss becomes especially apparent because these vessels must work against gravity to return blood to the heart, and the muscles depend heavily on robust circulation during walking and standing. When nitric oxide production falters, the vessels remain more constricted than they should be, offering more resistance to flow, delivering less oxygen and fewer nutrients to tissues that are already struggling with the accumulated wear of years. The fatigue you feel, the cramping that arrives after modest exertion, these are not merely muscular phenomena, but vascular ones, rooted in this invisible deficiency of a gas that exists for only seconds before breaking down, yet whose presence determines whether your circulation flows freely or labors against unnecessary asterisk. When most people hear about vitamin K, they think of blood clotting, of the body's ability to seal wounds and prevent hemorrhage. This is vitamin K1, found abundantly in leafy greens, and it performs that role admirably. But there exists a lesser-known form, vitamin K2, and its function in the body operates along entirely different pathways. Specifically, the menaquinone 7 form, often abbreviated as MK7, acts not in the blood itself, but in the tissues, in the bones, and crucially, in the arterial walls. Its role is one of direction, of guidance, of ensuring that calcium ends up where it belongs and stays away from where it causes harm. Calcium is essential for bone strength, for the structural integrity that allows you to move through the world without fracturing under ordinary stress. But calcium, when it wanders into soft tissues, into the walls of arteries, becomes a source of rigidity and dysfunction. This is where vitamin K2 reveals its quiet genius. It activates specific proteins, matrix GLA protein being the most significant, that bind to calcium and escort it out of arterial tissue. Without sufficient K2, these proteins remain dormant, inactive, unable to perform their protective work. Calcium then deposits freely in the vessel walls, forming crystalline structures that turn flexible arteries into rigid tubes. This calcification is not merely a cosmetic concern or an abstract marker on a medical scan. It directly impairs the ability of vessels to dilate and contract, to respond to the nitric oxide signals we discussed earlier. Even if your endothelial cells are producing adequate nitric oxide, if the smooth muscle around them is encased in calcium deposits, the vessel cannot expand properly. Blood flow remains restricted not because of a signaling problem, but because of a structural one. The arteries have become less like living tissue and more like calcified pipes, and in the legs, where circulation already faces gravitational challenges, this stiffening creates a compounding. Picture the arteries in your legs as they were perhaps 30 years ago, supple and responsive, their walls composed of layers that could stretch and recoil with each pulse of blood from the heart. Now imagine those same vessels today, if you are past 70, and consider what time is inscribed upon them. The calcium that should reside in your bones has migrated, molecule by molecule, year by year, into the medial layer of these arterial walls. It forms deposits that resemble bone itself, creating a condition that vascular researchers call medial calcification, distinct from the plaques that form on the inner surface, but equally devastating to circulation. This process is insidious because it produces no pain in its early stages, no obvious alarm that would prompt intervention. You do not feel calcium crystals forming in your femoral artery or in the smaller vessels that branch into your calves. What you eventually feel are the consequences. Your legs grow heavy during a short walk to the mailbox. A dull ache settles into your calves when you stand for more than a few minutes. Your feet, once warm even in winter, now feel perpetually cool to the touch, the skin taking on a pale quality that speaks of diminished blood delivery. These symptoms emerge not because your heart has weakened, but because the pathways through which blood must travel have narrowed and stiffened. The tragedy of arterial calcification is that it creates a vicious cycle. Stiff vessels increase blood pressure, which in turn causes more stress on the arterial walls, which promotes further calcium deposition. The body, trying to repair what it perceives as damage, actually makes the situation worse. Inflammation sets in, and inflammatory signals encourage even more calcium to settle into the tissue. Meanwhile, the muscles and nerves of your legs receive less oxygen, less glucose, fewer of the compounds they need to function without pain, and the quality of movement, of independence, of simple physical comfort begins to asterisk. The scientific literature on vitamin K2 and vascular health has grown considerably over the past 2 decades, moving from animal studies to human trials that measure actual changes in arterial stiffness and calcification. Research from the Rotterdam Study, which followed thousands of participants for years, found that higher dietary intake of K2 correlated with reduced arterial calcification and lower cardiovascular mortality. Subsequent trials have examined supplementation directly, typically using doses between 180 and 360 micrograms daily of the MK7 form, and have documented measurable improvements in arterial flexibility over periods of months to years. These are not overnight transformations, but gradual restorations of function, the kind that require patience and consistency. What makes K2 particularly compelling for those over 70 is that it addresses a root cause rather than merely masking symptoms. You are not forcing vessels open with pharmaceutical dilators or thinning blood to push it through narrowed passages. You are supporting the body's own regulatory systems, reactivating proteins that evolution designed to keep calcium in its proper place. Food sources include fermented foods like natto, certain cheeses, and egg yolks from pastured chickens, though achieving therapeutic doses through diet alone proves difficult for most people, making supplementation a practical consideration. Yet it is important to approach this with clear eyes and measured expectations. Vitamin K2 is not a miracle that will reverse decades of calcification in weeks, nor will it restore circulation to the levels you experienced at 40. What it offers is stabilization, potential improvement, and protection against further decline. Some people report feeling less leg fatigue within a few months, noticing warmer feet, experiencing fewer cramps during walking. Others notice subtler changes, or none that they can consciously perceive, though measurements may still show benefit. The path forward with K2 is one of gentle support, of giving your body tools it needs to maintain what vascular health remains, and perhaps reclaim.